Okay. So my favorite thing that I learned, my name is Grace Wetzel, and my favorite person that I learned about in personality class this semester was Erik Erikson. So Erik Erikson's identity theories can be drawn back to his childhood. Erikson was born to his mother by a man that was not her husband out of time. So his mother actually went to Germany to have him out of wedlock, and then while in Germany ended up marrying his pediatrician, who ended up being his stepfather throughout his life. His mother refused to reveal the true identity of his father to him throughout his childhood, which is difficult to not know who your father is and where you come from. And then another crisis that Erik Erikson experienced in his childhood was that although he was born in Germany, he had blonde hair and blue eyes and did not look like his German classmates. So he was Danish and he had Aryan features. And both of his mother and his stepfather were Jewish. So his German peers growing up did not accept him as a German, even though he himself identified as German. Coming to America, he came to America as the Nazis were taking over Germany. There was a large problem with Nazis, and as I mentioned before, he was Jewish and had Aryan features. So him and his family actually went back to anyway, they came to America and ended up in Boston. And there, Erikson actually opened his own practice, his psychoanalytic practice, where he specialized in children. And through the research that he was able to do, which was very diverse amount of research, he made a point that he wanted to do research with children of all different backgrounds from different cultures and different sides of the spectrum. So children that you would perceive as normal, children that you would think nothing is wrong with, as well as kids who were not normal or not stable. And through this research that he was able to conduct through his practice, it reinforced his belief that the influence of childhood can influence a human being throughout the rest of their life. So Erikson came up with the psychosocial stages, and these were 8 successive stages encompassing a human being's lifespan. And at each phase, a human or a person would come across a crisis. And how they dealt with this crisis, either in an adaptive or maladaptive way, would prove to influence the way that they progress into their next stage of life. So the first 4 stages are very similar to Freud's oral, anal, phallic, and latency stages. However, the big difference between the two is that Erikson put a lot of emphasis on the psychosocial correlations, excuse me, while Freud focused mainly on the biological factors that played into personality. So Erikson believed that it was the social and environmental factors to which we are exposed that control the ways in which we are genetically predetermined throughout the stages of life. And through this realization, he came to the conclusion that it was both environment and biological factors that created personality within a human. So the 8 different stages of the psychosocial development stages were the oral sensory stage, the muscular anal phase, locomotor genital phase, latency phase, adolescence, young adult, adulthood, and maturity/old age phase. So these are the 8 phases, and within each phase there was, like I said prior, a crisis that he believed that there's a crisis that you encounter at each stage of your life. And as I also mentioned before, there were both adaptive and maladaptive ways in which a human could cope with these crises. So for example, from the ages of 1 to 3, you're in the muscular anal phase, according to Erikson's theory. In this stage, your way of coping would either be autonomy or shame and doubt. So toddlers learn to exercise well and do things for themselves, or they will doubt their abilities and not have as much confidence as maybe their peers would have. And then I have listed here in this chart a list of all of the different stages, as well as the crises that people encounter in each crisis, and then the adaptive and versus the maladaptive way in which someone could deal with these. So another level to the psychosocial development phases that Erikson came up with is that within each stage, a person would encounter both basic strengths and basic weaknesses. And Erikson defined basic strengths as motivating characteristics and belief that derive from the satisfactory resolution of the crisis at each developmental stage, whereas a basic weakness, they are motivating characteristics that derive from the unsatisfactory resolution of the developmental crisis. So these go hand in hand with the adaptive versus maladaptive coping strategies. So a basic strength would, as we talked about, the muscular anal phase just a minute ago, and how the coping mechanisms, the adaptive one would be autonomy. That would be a basic strength. And moving into the next phase of life, it kind of sets you up for how you can deal with the following stage, whereas the basic weakness would be doubt or shame. And both, play a role in Erikson's theory in how you progress to the following stage. And there's so much more that I wish that I could get into about Erikson, because it was so interesting learning about his theory on psychosocial development. I mean, it was really interesting. But I kind of thought that these were the highlights and the main parts that I needed to talk about. All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a good night.